Hello, this is a short film on how to use calculus to find the profit maximizing level of output for a firm that's a monopoly firm. And in this short video, I'll be running through the key points of monopoly, but also I'll be talking about how to specifically calculate things using calculus. Now, what we're talking about here is monopoly. Monopoly is a special type of company in that it is the only company in a market. And so whereas in perfect competition, we described how there was a market and a firm and the relationship between the firm and the market, in this case, we only have one graph because in a monopoly, the firm is the market. And that is, there's one demand curve, and over that we lay the firm's marginal revenue curve and its marginal cost curve. Now, whereas a firm in a perfectly competitive market was a price taker because the interaction of market supply and market price determined what price the company would be facing in the marketplace, the power of a monopoly is that it can actually use its market power to set the price in the market. And we're going to be running through the math of this, but before we get there, let's just run through it graphically because it's slightly more complicated than the perfectly competitive situation. It starts off similar enough with a monopoly in that the quantity that it will produce will be based first on marginal cost, marginal revenue. Just like a perfectly competitive firm, the logic holds. A company will produce at the quantity where the cost of producing that next item is equal to the revenue that it will get from selling that item. Now, with a monopoly, once they determine their quantity, the next step is to determine the market price. To determine the market price, because they control the quantity, we will then go part 2 up to the demand curve and use the interaction of the quantity in the demand curve to figure out the price. So there's 3 steps involved in this monopoly calculation. And for that reason, for monopoly, we have 3 distinct equations that we're working with. The total cost equation, the total revenue equation, and the market demand equation. So the first equation that we're going to use is marginal cost, marginal revenue. In order to do that, I will have to calculate using calculus both my marginal cost and my marginal revenue curves. So my marginal cost curve, right? Marginal cost is the change in my total cost as my quantity changes, and what that's going to end up being is 4Q minus 20. For my total revenue curve, I will do basically the same process. For my marginal revenue, first derivative of my total revenue curve will be 100 minus 2Q. So I have right here, this is marginal revenue, and right here, it's marginal cost. At this point, it becomes an algebra exercise. I group my various things, pieces together, and I will have 6Q equals 120, which means that my Q is 20. Basically, this quantity here is the quantity that the monopolist will produce at to maximize their profits. That is step 1. Step 2 is finding out what the price is. So what I will do for step 2 is I will take my quantity and I will plug it into my demand curve. Quite simply, my demand curve is Q demand is 100 minus I substitute in the 20 for the quantity. 20 equals 100 minus P, and this will give me a price of 80. So I now have my quantity and my price. The final thing I'd actually want to find out is whether or not this monopoly is making a profit. And in order to find out whether or not making a profit, I need to actually consider my profit compared to, right, I'll find my profit by thinking about the relative nature of my price to my average cost. I have my price. I need to find my average cost at Q equals 20. I have my total cost equation. To find my average cost, it's just an algebraic equation at this point. All I need to do is take a Q out of each piece of my total cost equation. So this will become 2Q minus 20 plus 200 over Q. I just sub in 20 now for my Q's, and I will get average cost equals 2 times 20 minus 20 plus 200 divided by 20. This becomes average cost equals 2 times 20, 40, minus 20, plus 200 divided by 20 is 10, which means that my average cost at that quantity of 20 is 50. Sorry, 30. My mistake. This is what happens when you do it as you're doing it. So my average cost here is 30. As you can see, this company is making a significant profit, right? If we think about their profit per unit, price divided by quantity, substitute in the price is 80 minus their average cost at that level, which is 30. This gives me a profit per unit of 50. This is a significant profit per unit. If we think about all the units that they're making, 20 units, right? They are doing quite well. Now, if this was a perfectly competitive company, we would expect that this profit would encourage other companies to come into the market to try to get some of that profit. However, because this company is a monopoly, they can expect to be earning these profits well into the future because there will be no future competition against them. And so they're safe in getting these higher profits. And from the point of view of economists, this is troublesome because these companies that are monopolies or that have large amounts of market power are able to earn profits above their most efficient level of production, which is troublesome to the economic goal of trying to make an efficient economy.